Presentation. Okay, done. Transition. All right. So today's talk is researching climate change. By the way, because I have a problem when I'm giving these talks where my screen that I can see what I'm talking about is tiny, and so occasionally I'm trying not to completely contradict. I had my mental model completely contradict what's on the slide. I was like, oh, I'll just print out something. I just want to point out that my printout is probably, where's that? There we go, tinier than what's on the screen, but I will make do as best I can. So today is Earth Day. Earth Day was initially celebrated in 1970, so we're 52 years of Earth Day in. And there's all sorts of things that go on. There are lots of big organized events. For us, I was thinking of how to, we had the series of live streams that we've been doing, and I was thinking about how we could do something for Earth Day. And you know, we've had talks about conspiracy theories, talks about Shakespeare conspiracies, talks about Creative Commons, about nuns in America. And while these have all been really good talks, one of the things we haven't really sat down and talked about is the research process. So for Earth Day, I was thinking, like, when you talk about things like climate change and the environment, it's this big, huge topic. So I wanted to sort of have a discussion about how people can research it, because students have come and they've asked, you know, like, how do I research climate change? Like, how do I talk about climate change in my family without sounding like I'm just making things up? So I figured this would be, you know, a not terrible topic to just sit down and kind of show the research process when you're approaching something big and complex like this. All right. So for today, we're going to be having just a small handful of goals. And the first goal, is understanding how, when you take these big topics, how you generate, how these big topics generate lots of data, and how you as a researcher might sort through and find this data. Second one is when you're talking about something like climate change, how do you then develop a research topic about a subset of that data? So how do you approach, how do you define your own approach to the topic? And then, you know, we're going to talk about how to how to get to several sources of data, how to sort through several sources of data about the topic. And some of those sources are what is broadly considered open, and I'll explain what that means kind of in more detail as we're looking at some of the open stuff. And some of them require subscription. So now what I'm going to be doing is looking at the subscription materials that we have here in this library. If you're not a UH student, but you're a student at another college, university, you might have different resources, but some of the general concepts will be applicable. So one of the things, like, you know, that first point, understanding a complex topic. So not just climate change, but with a lot of topics, if someone comes up to the desk and they go, hey, I want to know about A. So in this case, hey, I want to do some research on climate change. My first question, or our first question, is, you know, can you be more specific? We'll start asking you questions. So if you come up to the research desk, the research help desk here, right outside my office, and you go, hey, I need to do some research about climate change, we're going to ask, you know, from what discipline? What element are you looking for? What years? What kind of sources do you need? Because when you're saying something like climate change, while there's the broad assumption that you just mean the general gradual accumulation of heat on the, you know, the surface of the earth or in the oceans of the earth, you actually can look at things like, so climate change can mean changes in global ocean temperatures. It can mean changes in a specific region like northern Alabama's weather patterns. It can mean things like advances in hurricane prediction models, or the economic impact of climate change. It can mean what kind of engineering advancements people are making to help improve infrastructure and like architectural integrity. It can mean green initiatives like non-fossil fuels, wind turbines or using like geothermal energy. It can mean the human cost of something like climate change, like people losing their lives or having to lose their livelihood. It can mean how an increased energy in the atmosphere, the increased heat and turbulent weather and stuff, how it causes an extinction level event, which it impacts ecosystems and it impacts evolution and it changes the biology of the earth forever going forward. You can talk about conspiracy theories about climate change. You can talk about fictional depictions of climate change, like how movies in the 80s, Mad Max style, had the collapse of the environment in the future, but it was always this kind of non-specific collapse. You can talk about things like organizations put together to fight climate change, like in the sense of the organizational decree or the organizational structure. So there's modes of talking about it. You got earth system science, weather science kind of stuff. You got engineering, chemistry, physics. You got sociology, psychology, economics, humanities. You've got like accounting and literature studies. You have all sorts of different ways you can talk about a topic when it's this big. When a topic is this big, it doesn't necessarily fit inside of any one box, even when you have sort of a given definition for it. So, how do you research it then with it being climate change? And we break it down into steps, all right? And these steps are basically the same sort of steps that you might use for any kind of research, really. Step one, you figure out what you want to know about climate change. Now, the you in this situation could be you as a student for a class, it could be you as a researcher for tenure, it could be you as a person who's just curious. But I'm going to put this in as a very, you make some decisions about what you want to research. And zooming back across my map here, so you look at which of these elements you're really wanting to research. Are you looking for the raw data? Are you looking for the impact? Are you looking for weather patterns? Are you looking for fictional depictions? Are you looking for conspiracy theories about it? And a lot of times research will actually involve multiple of these things, but you sort of decide, you come up with the idea of which specific element you are looking for. So going all the way back, step two is which framework do you wish to explore this from? And this is important when people come up to the desk and they ask us, hey, can you help me search for climate change? Or can you help me search for the price of pizzas? Can you help me search for shoe design? We sit down and we start out asking, what direction are you trying to research this in? Because this changes the kind of research you do. And zooming all the way back over, looking at those disciplines we had earlier, earth system science, physics, chemistry, sociology, psychology, humanities, you decide if this is essentially an engineering question, which might have different requirements than a physics question, which has different requirements from an earth system science question, which has different requirements from a economics question. So you kind of pick your question and then you frame your question. And then step three, sort of what this talk is mostly about, is what sources do you need to look at to approach the question and that you're asking in the framework that you're asking it. So pretty much from the rest of the talk, we're going to be mostly looking at this. However, if we don't tend to get a lot, but if people have stopped by and do have questions, feel free to jump in, ask something, and I can go back and as best I can. And at a point not long from now, I'm going to go to some live searching, and then I'd be perfectly fine with demoing certain databases and such. After step three, so after you start gathering up your stuff, you get to the how do you evaluate and analyze sources? And we're not really going into that today because that's the talk about what sources to get is already big. The talk about how you analyze and come to definitive conclusions that this is a viable source is just as big. Like it could easily be its own part two. Fact is that first little introduction section there could be a part one. Like this could have easily been a 4-part series and probably plus some. So if you do want help with this, so if this is a topic that interests you, or if any topic interests you, and you're here in the Huntsville region, or can get to Huntsville, or specifically here in the UH campus, and you would like help, feel free to come into the Research Help Desk. That's what we do. We help people find information, and we will help you with topic development. We'll help you find experts that can help you do things. We're all about helping folks. Okay. So let's talk about sources about climate change. And I put it in quotes there not because I'm like, wink wink, like climate change, but just because, again, like I said, climate change is both a specific scientific phenomenon, but it's also a fairly massive human phenomenon. And there are a lot of sources. I ended up cutting probably half of the sources I was going to cover out just for sheer time constraints. And originally this was going to be an image of a kid skipping a stone, and I was going to talk about stone skipping across water, about just dipping your toes in or whatever. Or then I was going to do an architecture and Helsinki reference with their song "Do the Whirlwind." Just know there's a lot of sources coming up. Broadly speaking, you get 3 rough types of sources. And rough's not quite the right word, but you'll see. So you got your primary source, which is like raw data. In the classic academic sense, this is interviews, this is the data itself, this is the first-hand accounts. It's that level of source. Secondary source is research, so it's source that takes the data and does things to it, like, it publishes it in journals, it makes commentary on it. And then there's a tertiary source, which I call analysis, which is possibly not the thing, but it tends to be a secondary analysis, which is when folks take the published research about the published data, or unpublished data, as the case usually is, and they then come up with policy, and they come up with action items and such about it. So generally that tertiary type document ends up becoming legal documents, organizational statements. It becomes art, humanities, newspaper articles, people's reactions, just the general mood of the situation, which in itself then becomes another, raw data itself, primary document. So you get this sort of cycle of source types. Primary data, like raw data, is the root of all research. It's not necessarily the best thing to look at for everyone, because usually raw data is very raw, so you have to have paradigms and you have to have concepts to analyze it. But raw data is the root of the other research, but you usually have to know exactly how to gather it, how to access it, how to process it. And frankly, if you're somebody who's running around doing a lot of raw data about climate change already and are already aware of all these systems, the rest of this talk is more than likely going to be just a little bit underwhelming to you. But you're welcome to hang out, and then welcome to call me out if so the case may be. And as for the primary versus, the secondary versus tertiary, like research versus analysis, don't worry too much about my use of those terms, because usually what will happen is a lot of papers will crisscross. So like if you're looking up like academic research, it's probably going to have the research portion and the analysis portion. Like I said, I was just trying to figure out a way to frame it, like some quick terminology that you could use. The other way you can divide up sources in a topic like this is open sources versus subscription sources. Versus is wrong, we'll say or subscription sources. So open sources are generally sources that are published with the notion that people can share them, access them, view them without any kind of subscription payment. And they're generally written with the intention to be shared, accessed, and discussed. A lot of government data becomes that, and we'll spend a good chunk of time talking about some of the government data that is kind of the the core center of a lot of stuff. But then subscription services are services that they tend to be more of those secondary / research analysis sources, but they analyze the data, they do research on that data, they get published about it, and it's like journals and such. Don't get too hung up on whether one or the other is better or worse. It's not that open source is better than subscription source. It's not that subscription source is better than open source. It's basically they just come from different paradigms. Going forward, you're probably going to see a lot more open everything. But that's, that was my last talk about the future of libraries in a lot of ways. So don't really worry about it. Like, don't consider like grade A and grade B. They're both really good sources. They just require different ways to access them. But we're going to start out looking at some open source stuff. And the primary source for open source that I'm going to start with is alphabet soup. Multiple government agencies. You have, NOAA, you got EPA, NASA, you've got Department of Energy, the Department of Interior, you got the National Science Foundation, and you've got agencies like the UN, the United Nations, and the WHO, the World Health Organization. There are several major organizations. Generally, the bigger an organization is, whether it's governmental or nonprofit or even for-profit, usually the more it talks about and deals with the reality of climate change. For a lot of American research, there is these government agencies are useful as a starting point to just get a lot of free available to the public data. The three that we're going to look at primarily in this context is NOAA, EPA, and NASA, and mostly this first one, NOAA. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, this is their main focus. Is my mouse showing up on the screen? Apologies if it is. We'll move it over there for a second, but I'll have to move it back and forth as I click things. But so NOAA, they have a lot of data related to climate change, but also just weather patterns and all sorts of things. Their website is really useful, and when we kind of get to the part where I'll start transitioning to the the subscription databases, I'll bounce back and show you NOAA's website. But they have search boxes. They got a lot of research terms. They have related to them is things like this, the National Center for Environmental Information, which includes actual access to data links and data archive links for people interested in that. But it's also just got numbers of reports, numbers of commentaries and things that you can access. And related to NOAA, but also with the National Weather Service, is weather.gov, which can be really useful if your specific research into climate change is looking at things like local weather patterns. Like if you're just interested in like your local historical weather, then this is not a bad website. That's a weird way to say that. This is a decent website to look up that kind of thing. The other ones also have some of this data, but this is another tool to put in the toolbox related to the NOAA side. EPA also gets, obviously, the Environmental Protection Agency is going to have some interest in climate change. They're useful and they have data. I'm not going to go into a big in-depth thing about the EPA's climate change initiative, or just kind of skipping slightly ahead, NASA's climate change initiative. I will say of the three, NASA probably wins in coolest website. But all three of these government agencies have data that would be useful. And I mean data in the sense of both raw data, just straight numbers that you can crunch if you know how. But also they have access to just reports, analyses, things you can download. You can look at historical reports. You can look at archives of things. So all three of them are useful agencies just if you're somebody who goes, I want to know a little bit more about climate change. Just to browse to go to the climate.nasa.gov or the EPA.gov slash, I think it was topic slash climate change. You can just go to EPA.gov and search climate change. Or to go to NOAA.gov, NOAA.gov, or to that NCEI.NOAA.gov. All of those sites are good if you just want to show up and take a look at some of the basic levels of climate change, but also then they have more stuff that when you dig in, you can get into increasingly complex amounts of data. One second. So those three are sort of the three that if a student came up to the desk, I would say, hey, go look at these three. But they're not the only three. So, but wait, there's more. And this is humorous to me, but the globalchange.gov, because when climate change becomes a dirty word, why not have, global warming became a dirty word, it became climate change. So now climate change is something of a dirty word. So let's have global change. And it's exactly what you think it is. Like it's climate change / global warming research. But it's over a number of government agencies have their own individual portals that looks at the research and the policies and how it impacts their services. A few of those we've already talked about. Department of Interior, Department of Energy are obviously good sources, but it technically impacts all levels of the U.S. government. It erodes coastal line. It increases the intensity of weather. It has, health impacts. It's got national security impacts, etc. If you were wanting just to see what does the government, and I said that like a true Southerner, but what does the government say about climate change and environmental data? Data.gov, data.gov, is probably your one-stop shop. And I say probably in the sense of those other websites might be a little easier to just browse, but data.gov is if you just wanted to see what the EPA and everyone, what kind of reports they had about climate change, that's the one you go to. It's kind of like a discovery service, which we'll show you in a minute for UAH, versus a specific database. There are other types of websites and agencies, though, that study it that aren't just purely purely directly government. The Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, C2ES.org, which was, I think, either originally was Pew Environmental Research, or it is an offshoot from Pew Environmental Research, or just a successor to it. But in generally, they do a lot of stuff like researching policy, public opinion. They have a pretty substantial library of a lot of things related to it. And they can be useful for just getting a lot of the more human social side of things, which is a big part of studying climate change. You also have the National Center for Atmospheric Research, which isn't purely dedicated to climate change, but also would still be of use. The National Science Foundation. I keep wanting to say Federation because I think I'm a nerd, but this one could be useful just because they have a lot of projects. They even have, sort of job opportunities kind of stuff for people who are interested in that kind of thing. There's also lots of other government data that can be applied to climate change research depending on what your specific research is. For instance, census data showing people moving to and from certain parts of the country, like coastal lands or high impact zones for like tornadoes and such. You can look at things like job data for people that are going into climate-related fields. I saw a broad report. I have never actually confirmed it, about the younger people tending to shift towards government. Government, but environmental-related jobs as just a thing of interest for them. So you can track that sort of thing, and this can inform your paper, even though your paper is about something else. Or maybe your paper is about the economic impact of climate change, and you do research into building costs along the coastlines and how that changes things. Um, of course, government agencies aren't the only open, free data out there. You've got this one's from Princeton, the Princeton Center for Policy Research, Energy and Environment. But there are other colleges and nonprofit types, nonprofit education sources that have these centers that have their own libraries, archives, etc. And then you have, the nonprofit companies like Skeptical Science that provide data. These two, and I'll bounce back and forth here, but like, so this one, would probably be more if you were looking for kind of policy stuff. This one's more if you were going to have an argument with your uncle at Thanksgiving. But, they all serve a purpose doing research, because one of the things you can research about climate change is how people research climate change. And this could be, you could look at this differential analysis. And, and broadly speaking, don't be afraid to think outside of the America. Like, because of the nature of the beast, I'm here at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, and students are coming in largely from this university to talk about resources that we have that kind of naturally more impact our half of the, or well, whatever percentage the United States makes up of the surface of the planet. So a lot of the research does tend to have an American focus. I'm looking kind of at that, but more or less every country out there is going to have its own environmental agency. They're going to have people who study it, and there's plenty of those countries that have higher amounts of impact because of low-lying coast or being more in the path of violent storms, that are going to have a higher interest in studying it harder and faster. And there's plenty of countries that have had green initiatives have been built into their policy on a much faster rate of speed than America. So while I'm mostly talking about the US, and I'm not saying that like our National Weather Service is better than other countries. I'm just saying that this is kind of what I'm approaching as something that a lot of our students here would use. There are lots of websites I could point you at here, but because we're effectively already at the halfway point and I want to get onto some of the more subscription stuff, just one potential one to look at is the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. There's also a United Nations climate change site. There's the WHO, World Health Organization, has climate change sites. If you go to like Australia's government site, those climate change, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so we're about to take a look. I'm about to switch my, give me 1 second. I am about to switch to a different window. If I can figure out how. Somehow. Well, if I can figure out how, I will just use my plan had been to not use my main browser. Aha. Boom. And then let me go back here. And I think I've already transitioned, but I will click it again. So we're going to take a look at some of these websites. So the first few I'm going to look at are going to be websites that I talked about kind of in brief, but we're going to take a look at some open websites, some closed websites. I don't want to say closed, subscription websites that you would have to have access either through the Salmon Library /UAH or through another agency. And we're just going to take a look at them. I'm going to give you just sort of a live demo, which is something we haven't actually done in these live streams, but is kind of a major portion of library instruction, information literacy, understanding. So here we go. And this will unfortunately utterly block my chat, but I will try my best to keep an eye out to see if people do wander in and ask questions and respond as best I can. But this is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and you've got a lot of tabs here. I mean, this is Earth Day and Earth Week kind of stuff, so you're going to see a lot of stuff very much so on topic right now. But as you look at your tabs over here, you get research tabs like this one that brings up different kinds of research you can look into, and you can do, you can search, we'll just very bam, climate change impact, and you can just see the results that comes from their website. I'm going to try to avoid my twitchy, click fast, scroll fast sort of way of talking, just because it probably will blur out YouTube. But this is just one of those things. And like I said, this kind of website, this is standing in for sort of all of those governmental agency websites. Because if I come in on this website and I search for, like, I just want to see climate change impacts, because I'm writing a paper and I need 3 open sources or whatever, then you come in and you look, you click this, and I'm striking things on my desk. But, and you read through and you just see the stuff, and they've got all kinds of stuff. Like, they've got all of these sort of data resources you can get to: U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, impacts on marine species distribution, sea level trends, drought data things, stuff about the global temperature, stuff about glacier shrinkage, water. So they just have a lot of data, and a lot of this it's not necessarily reference level, but it does look at just some general chunks of data that can inform and give you some idea. So like, if you're developing a paper and you're not even exactly sure what paper you're developing, websites like this can kind of help you to fill in some gaps and get some ideas. And then related to NOAA again, and there's some sort of delay going on today, but the National Center for Environmental Information also has lots of data about studying environmental data. Like, it's just got lots of data about various environmental topics, up to and including things that would be related to climate change. And you can see recent weather. I will go ahead and type in 35899. Oh, it is zooming like the satellites are pointing to us. Looks like they don't have data for UAH, and that makes me sad, but that's okay. That happens. But this is a way that when you can go in with the correct tools, and you can actually get certain very specific data sets that you can work with. So if you get to a point in your class where you need to actually work with live data, the NCEI, I think I said NCES earlier, that's like the National Center for Education Statistics. There's a reason why my brain would go to that one. But if you go to the NCEI, you can get some of this data to use. So that's, it's another tool for your toolkit, so to speak. And then data.gov, this is the one that I told you that you'd probably want to come to if you're going to be researching most anything, but you don't want to go to a specific website. Like, you can come here and you can search for climate change. And you get 36,373 data sets related to climate change. Some of these are going to be data sets. I think there's going to be also just some other types of information, but you get this again. Here is that kind of raw data that, if you know how to process and analyze it. The Center for Climate Energy Solutions, they have a pretty extensive library. I don't know how many items. I don't know if there's a good way for me to tell you how many items, but a fairly extensive library of looking at various policies, various public opinions and stuff. And so we were talking about open access journals, or like more academic and more secondary research, but still open. And this is a good transition one. So this is PubMed. Now I'll show you how to get. So let's just actually bounce over here. So if you're on our homepage and you want to get to PubMed, click on Articles and Databases here, and then click on the P for Pub, and then you can scroll down a lot further than I was expected to. We have a lot of P databases. So you get to PubMed, and PubMed, if you know it, you're going to say, well, it's National Library of Medicine, but it has a lot of scientific research outside of just what you might think of as pure medicine. For instance, you can just search for climate change, and without any limiters, I get about 70,000 results. But you can specifically look for like climate change health, climate change infectious diseases and such, and they have various things, and it can be just a very good resource. And it's like, I'm not searching this through the library. This is just everybody's available search. Like you right now could go to you would go to Google or Bing or whatever and search for PubMed, but you go to pubmed.ncbi.nl. It's one of those just URLs that rolls off the tongue. Looking at some other sources of open access journals, this isn't the only one. This is just one that I use a lot, and it's the Directory of Open Access Journals, and it's got a lot of journals and a lot of records, and you can, again, I'm just using very broad terms. I can search for climate change, and this shows me the various journals that would fit that general field. I can also go back and search for articles about climate change, and it brings back 58,000 and something articles about it. And this isn't all going to be in English. They're not all going to be specifically about one specific version of environment. They're not all going to be from the prospect of environmental science, but they're going to cover a lot of different things. But that's nature of the beast. But you can narrow it down. I want to look at how climate change impacts law, and I get 370 articles, because the legal obligations for climate change is going to be a very real course of study very shortly. The sort of central big open access journal that gets talked about a lot, PLOS One, Public Library of Science, has a lot of data. I mean, it's Earth Day, so this sort of pops up, but multi-level predictors of climate change beliefs in Africa, which talks about one of those other aspects we were discussing, how people sometimes don't believe in climate change or believe in the basic story of climate change and how that impacts things, but that's in itself is a thing of study. But again, on PLOS One, you can search climate change, you can search coastal erosion, you can search turbulent weather patterns, however you want to search, and you can just do your search, and it's free, and a lot of this stuff is through some variation of a Creative Commons talk. And believe it or not, there is a talk on this live stream not long ago about Creative Commons. If you're curious what I mean by that, you can go back and look at it. Sort of a related project to PLOS One, but not necessarily directly related, is the Data Dryad, which has its more data sets come from other sources. A lot of the ones I showed you earlier from governmental agencies. This is sometimes a little bit trickier to search, but when you dig down, you'll end up finding that's a CC001, you'll end up finding various tables of data sets that you can download. And it's a useful way, again, to add more raw data to your search. So that was an extremely whirlwind catch-up tour of how to use those open access ones. And I've got about 15 minutes left. And so I'm just going to give you another complete whirlwind tour of doing the sort of research using the Salmon Library page. So this is uh.edu/library. I was always curious because this is like a clean browser, like the random links that have showed up among time there. So uh.edu/library. And if you're a student or just a guest coming in, the first, I'm saying a whole lot, and I apologize, but the first thing you do is you scroll down here, search the library, and you can type in whatever you want. But we've been using this as a basic search. You search climate change, and this takes you to Primo Pathfinder, which is our discovery service. So a discovery service is like that, kind of like that data.gov. It takes data sets from a bunch of different places and brings them in one easy to search. In this case, it brings in stuff from multiple databases, including some of the ones we've already talked about, some of the more open access and free ones, and it combines their indices together so that when you search it, you're actually searching more. So when I search climate change on Primo Pathfinder, the stuff that UAH has an access to if you're a student is about 3.5 million. And that's going to be a little bit of everything. So if you're using Primo, usually the caveat is you're going to get a lot from all the different disciplines. So it's like that first step when we were talking about, you got to think of what your question is going to be, and then what frame your question is going to be, and those are a little bit interchangeable. But you gotta have your discipline and your question. You got to have your two vectors showing you which research you want to get. And this is an example of why, is because when you're dealing with millions of articles and books and stuff on the topic, you can't sort through it all. You could just trace the database, or trust the database and just go and find the first 2 books and first 2 articles that show up and say these are good. But generally, you're going to want to have a mental concept of limiters. So with Primo, there's various ways to limit. One is advanced search. So I could do climate, and I could do, say, something like health impacts. I can change climate change. I haven't really used their new layout very much, where they've changed how this works. I can put climate change in quotes so that I want it to show up as a phrase, climate change. And I want it to also include things about health impacts. Maybe I don't want books. Maybe I just want peer-reviewed journal articles, and maybe I want to make sure they're peer-reviewed journal articles from the last, we'll say 10 years, so I'll say 2012. That's me thinking hard about math. So we now have broken down those so many millions. We're down to about 1,000th of our original thing, but you see it's still bringing books, things related to peer-reviewed stuff. Oh, it actually didn't apply that. Oh, I see. Again, I have to get used to some of the changes to the clicking. So now we're half that. And maybe I want to specify articles, so not reviews of books, not editorial comment. I want peer-reviewed articles. So we now have last 10 years articles from peer-reviewed journals about climate change and health impacts, and we have still about 189,000. So if you were doing this, you would probably either need to just trust the database to bring you back relevant stuff, or you want to go in and go back to your the search criteria and maybe add in a new line, or add in like some other kind of information, and just do things that make it down. As a note, if I do another search, like let's just throw in coastal, it's going to lose all of my limiters. So what you want to do is, when you're on this, if you mouse over it, you can click this, and this locks it into place. So now if I go in and add a new line, coastal, then it's going to remember those things, and also now have climate change, health impacts, and coastal, from coastal regions and such. So Primo is where a lot of people, if they were first dipping their toes into the research, I would probably actually start them here before I even started them on the various government websites. I would point out the government websites, but I would start them here because this is just our primary way of getting a glance at all the data we have. And it's not the only way, though. So we have quite a few databases, and I'm going to show just a couple because I've got about less than 10 minutes or so to go. But this is where that framing of your question comes from. Are you wanting to look at it from a scientific standpoint? Well, we've already talked about PubMed. So you could also click on, say, Science Direct. You could click on something like Scopus, and I'll show you the difference in those two in a second. If you're wanting to look at like the psychological aspects of climate change, we got psych articles and psych info. If you wanted to look at more of the literary stuff, you could use JSTOR, MLA. If you're looking at more of the engineering stuff, we have IEEE. If you're wanting to look at more of the like the business side and economic side, we have Business Source Premier. And all of those databases are viable. We have more than that. Like you can go to Earth System Science here, click on the All Subjects and scroll down to Earth System Science. And we have green file, meteorological, geoastrophysical abstracts. We've got the ProQuest SciTech collection. This is I already talked about this one, so some of these are going to be those open sources we talked about, the National Center for Environmental Information. Pollution abstracts. We have other science databases, like science.gov, which was one of the .gov websites I had to skip over just for time. And a lot of them have fairly similar limiters to what we just saw. So Science Direct is a big one. You can, again, you just can do climate change. And we can do climate change and health impacts. The advantage, like you might say the disadvantage is I did climate change and health impacts, and honestly I didn't get that many fewer articles, but you'll get fewer articles, but they'll tend to be more on point. So I'm in Science Direct, I'm getting mostly articles about science. If I'm in Business Source Premier, I'm going to be getting, mostly articles about business and economics. And I'll go ahead and just do a quick search in Business Source Premier to show you, I won't even say health, I'll just say climate change. 71,000, and it's about accounting for climate change, and you look through, and there's all kinds of things about legal policy and economic policy about climate change, how climate change is, we could, if you wanted, you could look at climate change and marketing, or marketing initiatives or whatever, and you could look at all kinds of things like this, because probably from the business side, you're going to see a lot of people discussing how climate change is in itself sort of a business thing. So that's sort of Science Direct and, Business Source Premier. But again, you've got a lot of options over here. You can work on it, and if you need help with using these databases, we can show you. Now, what I'm going to show you real quick is Scopus. There's all sorts of ways to use Scopus. It's a very powerful tool. I'm going to just be showing you the most basic way to use it, and that's if you come to Scopus, and again, much like Science Direct and Business Source, you're going to have access through UAH as a student, faculty, like researcher, etc., or as a guest with a guest pass, which can include like alumni and stuff here in building. But if you search for, and this is not necessarily the best search terms to use, global change, climate change, there are hundreds, impact, health impacts, etc., etc. Just because, we don't want to get too deep in the weeds. But I can search for, say, climate change. Scopus tells me that there's 4,000. Now, Scopus isn't a full text database. I can click this and it can take me to a search on Primo to see if we have full text, but the purpose of Scopus isn't to bring back full text. In this case, we do have it. Looks like it's in Brazilian Portuguese. No, it includes English, okay. But it's something we have. Where you use Scopus is a lot of times if you're trying to search for things like specific authors, you're trying to figure out which authors are writing the most about it. You're trying to figure out which subject areas are dealing the most with it. You're looking at things like funding sponsors. Like maybe you're trying to compare how the National Science Foundation differs from maybe one of the other international foundations as far as the kind of stuff it publishes about climate change. And again, climate change is a big topic, so all of these types of all these versions of it are completely legitimate ways to research it. It's not just about weather data. It's about the way that this specific weather data impacts every aspect of our lives going forward. Other things you can do, though, besides limiting to certain dates, limiting to certain types of open access versus non-open access, is you can do things like cited by the highest number of citations. Like you can sort it by the highest number of citations. So when you do something like this and you see the, NSAR, what was that, the National Center for Atmospheric Research 40-year reanalysis report, that's been cited 23,000 times, which is an amazing amount of times for something to be cited. And so this kind of thing the global consequences of land use, 7,000 citations, 17 years, it can help you to kind of see what research people are using the most and citing the most and referring to the most. And that's probably been the last UH database I would look at any kind of depth, but we have, like I said, others. We have ProQuest SciTech collection. We have, let me actually go back to just the Earth System Science stuff here. And again, that's just, when you go to our A to Z databases page, this is just under the subjects. So, Primo Pathfinder, yeah, National Science. I saw science.gov. Yeah, and then we have some of the green file, is a big portion of studying this kind of thing. But what if you're, say, not a UAH student, or you don't have access to the library, but you are from Alabama? As just a note, you also have access to Alabama Virtual Library. So the database I'm about to show you on this is also in our collection, because a lot of the college university ones are. But a useful one here for talking about this sort of thing. So you do have things like, say, Academic Search Premier. This could be a useful database for searching. It's going to probably show the UAH version. No, it says UAVL. So if you were in Alabama and have access to the Alabama Virtual Library, you can search this for climate change. And you'll get, they have 370,000 articles related to it. But one of them that is actually kind of useful depending on what you're doing is, I am looking for it, there we go, Opposing Viewpoints by Gill. And like I said, this is one of the Alabama Virtual Library ones. You can browse the issues, and just, if I click that way too fast, as I'm prone to do, it's right over here. You can search for it here as well, but if you browse the issues, they have a page. I gotta figure out where they put it. I may have to go back and search for it. Climate. Do they call it global warming? Yeah, global warming, climate change. So they have a page that has just a general overview to talk about it. Oh, and I didn't really show you that, but Primo, when you search for something like climate change, just do a new search. So in Primo, whoops. Stop. There you go. So when you do a search, you do also get this sort of basic breakdown stuff that you can use. So kind of like that, with the opposing viewpoints, you get this basic breakdown. You get down, there's, featured viewpoints, which some will be newspaper articles, some are primary sources, some are sort of, like scientific papers. Then you get these sort of viewpoints, and again, viewpoints, it can be a mix of things, but it's sort of just, here are some thought-provoking pieces about it. You get reference entries, you get biographies, infographics, statistics, primary sources, cartoons, blogs, audio, video, magazines, academics, articles, newspaper, websites. You get a lot of things. You get related topics. So I said if someone came up to the desk and asked me about climate change, I would sit down and first be asked, okay, what are you actually researching involving climate change? And then I would send them to Primo, probably, unless they had a very specific thing in mind, and then I might send them elsewhere. But if someone came up to me and there was like, I'm just curious about climate change and some of the big view picture of it, Opposing Viewpoints would be probably the second database I would show them for this kind of topic, where it's a big, impacts every level of life, yet it's considered controversial topic. Opposing Viewpoints is made like that. And like I said, that's on the AVL, which would be applicable to UH students. But if you're on the UH website, go clear all. You also can just find it under the O's for opposing, and I think I have it over here in the corner. I do. So it's just right here. And this, you can get to it from AVL or from UH. And it's a good and important website that I recommend. So let me close. I'm not going to close that because I'm about to switch back to, oops, almost the wrong one, this guy. And so, all right, we get back to our actual presentation, and we'll just kind of go to here's just sort of our wrapping up. So when you're doing research about anything, but in this case about climate change, remember that the first thing you got to do is you got to figure out your question, and or you got to frame your question. Either one of those can be step one. I think I put the first one as step one, the second one as step two. But generally, you've got to come up with, I'm curious about the humanity, like I'm curious about the fictional depiction of climate change and the way that that might have actually backfired because it made people think of climate change as sort of a fairy tale, right? So you come up with that sort of statement, question, hypothesis, etc., etc. Then, you frame it like, let's look at this in terms of marketing and literary, like the way that literature relates to everyday life. Like how does framing it as genre fiction impact it in the long run? So after that, you then identify what resources would work for you. If you're a student at UAH, I would sit you down with Primo. If you're talking about fiction, I'm probably going to bring up JSTOR. I'm going to probably bring up literature resources from Gale, etc. If you're elsewhere, you may have other things to use. Google Scholar, I skipped over, but it's a perfectly valid search as long as you're okay with the disappointment of not necessarily having access to the materials it brings back. But so yeah, if you're here, we're going to be looking at some of the books. We're going to bring up the source material and stuff. But we're going to figure out which resources will work, and then I'm going to let you do research. I'll let you go and do the searches, work on your searches, develop your searches and topics, find the data, and then at this point you start to evaluate your research. So you've looked up stuff about the different books that deal with post-apocalyptic environmental collapse in different movies, and you've identified various things that are applicable to your, the paper that you're wanting to write, and you've got a stack of stuff about the way that this, the way that people perceive fiction versus nonfiction, etc. And you're wanting to do something with it. And now you get to the point where you got to go back and you got to update your question or your frame of reference. Because maybe you found out that this isn't really a literature question, maybe this is a straight up marketing question, etc. So your next step is then to go back and plug in new search terms, find out new things, and you repeat as needed. Eventually you end up with the research that you feel like answers a question that you feel like asking, etc. And just remember, we're here to help. Like, the reason we put these kind of talks on and we talk to people about how to research isn't because we're being paid by Elsevier or by the government to I guess that's a point of technicality, but we're not being, we're not being asked to get out here and promote these sources. We're promoting these sources because we want you to find the data that you need. And we are definitely here to help. Feel free to stop by, go to our website, you can call us, you can chat with us through our website, you can email us through our website, etc. And ask a question, and we'll do what we can to help you. If we don't ourselves know the answer, we'll do our best to connect you with someone who does. And I don't think there's a lot of people around, but if anyone has a question, feel free to throw them in. If you have a question, or if you have a suggestion for future live streams that you would like to attend, if you catch this like right now, or if you catch this later, you can email them to me. Let me switch windows here. You can email me at that email address, and which by the nature of chat probably actually showed up before I said those words because it's weird delays and lags. But you can email me and we'll talk about it again, or stop by and here at the research help desk, or whatever makes you comfortable. I have clicked. Hold on, let me get to my actual control the live stream windows real quick, and this guy. Okay, and well, that will bring this pretty much to an end. And it has been fun. It's a topic that I'm interested in, and I'm especially interested in the way that these big topics they don't fit into an easy box. But thank you all for attending, and this is the final live stream of this semester. I don't know exactly what we're going to do going forward. I've enjoyed them. Hopefully other people have enjoyed them. We definitely have gotten some pretty big hits on a couple of them. So we might do a few over the summer. I'm kind of interested in doing one about rules light RPGs, and maybe even some about tokusatsu, like Ultraman, since there's a new Ultraman movie coming out in Japan. And I'm always down for talking about horror, and often down for talking about mystery, even though some of my chat I just have to make up on the fly. But at any rate, I will set this to a thank you for attending, and we will be bringing the live stream to a close.